Hi, this is Dr. Frank Chopatin with the Church of Rational Truth. Today, I've got an interesting topic that actually came to me because of talking with a friend. We basically got into the topic of why she's Christian, why she decided to follow the Christian faith, and basically it came down to her wanting to know what is moral, what she should do in her life, knowing the difference between right and wrong, and also because she thought having that would help her be more moral or do more of the right thing, stop her from doing immoral things. And that was really one of her impetuses to find that religion, is because she wanted something to keep her from doing things that were immoral. She wanted to know this is the right thing to do. You should do this, and then the church was a way to try to push her further into that. Because of some divine retribution, or because God said you should do this, therefore you should do this. Church also has lots of, or that church had lots of ways of reinforcing that because of judgment and other things from some of its members, which kind of keep you in line, keep you doing those moral things. And so we kind of got into the topic of morality. And do you need that? Do you need some codified system that says this is right, this is wrong, these are the hard lines, and then having a way of reinforcing that right and wrong? And the Christian church kind of is different than the rational church, or what we believe in terms of right and wrong. Uh, it kind of got into the do you need that to do the right thing? Do you need someone forcing you? Do you need a system that is cosmically telling you need to do these things, or else there's going to be some divine punishment to do the right thing? I would argue that most people hopefully shouldn't need that. Hopefully, most people should just need the in the part of it that is knowing that you are doing the right thing, or just the fact that what you're doing is good, should be enough reason to do good. You shouldn't need to some additional reward to do good. You shouldn't need some promise of heaven, some promise of some greater afterlife to do good. You should want to do good because it's good. Do you want to do evil? Do you want to make the world a worse place for people? Or do you want to make the world a better place, a good place for people to live, a good place for yourself, a good place for your family? Do you want to push for justice? Do you want to push for people to be able to live happy, productive lives together? I would say that in and of itself should be a reason to want to do good or want to be a moral person, versus the, rob, cheat, steal, lie, hurt others, make this a worse place. That should be enough reason in of itself. You shouldn't need this additional big, karmic or cosmic reasoning for doing good. Lack of this punishment shouldn't be reason to do good or bad. You should just want to do good naturally, because it is better for everyone if you do good, or if you do things morally or in the right way. With that being said, how do you come about what is moral? How do you decide, is this a moral thing to do or not? And a lot of people struggle with that, and I think that's one of the main reasons some people go towards other religions. Other religions are very clear. They'll put out things like Ten Commandments, or they'll be like, not Exodus, they'll be like Ezekiel, where they will list long things of this is how you should do all these things, and then go into very exact, this is right, this is wrong. And then people don't have to think about it. You just have to follow what the church says, or you have to follow what the Bible says, or you have to follow what the Torah says, or you have to follow what the Quran says, and they'll just be very strict with what is right and wrong. That's easy. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to go back and forth. All you have to do is go to either your book or your pastor and say, what should I do? Should I not be gay? Should I not have sex before marriage? Should I not have an abortion? Should I eat meat on, what is it? Meat on Fridays before Easter. It's easy. You don't have to think about it. You get a clear yes and no answer, and it's easy to live your life. You don't have to be questioning on whether you're doing right or wrong, because you have a whole system that is telling you exactly if it's right or wrong, if you should be doing it, should not be doing it. That's nice. That's convenient. But honestly, I think it's a gross oversimplification, and it's a very ignorant way of going about it. Me following certain rules, I shouldn't follow them just because someone's telling me I should do it, or just because some god just, said these are the things you should do them. I should probably do those things because I understand why I'm doing them. I understand what is good and bad about them. And then I decide to do those things that I think are good, rather than just, randomly follow rules because that's what's been put in front of me. Um, so for the Church of Rational Truth, we believe that morality is relative, that things are not always so clear cut, and that you can't just put out a list of, hey, these are the 1,000 things you should do, and these are the 1,000 things that are forbidden. Follow those things, and you will go to heaven, or good things will happen. We don't believe in that. We believe that morality is very relative. And that's kind of what this kind of talk or this lecture is all about, is moral relativity. Something that can be moral in one situation can be very immoral in another. Some things that are clearly good can in other times be clearly bad. It's not always a clear cut answer. It's not always just black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray. One great example of this in real life is with the code of law. Most code of law is kind of hard set, where they'll say, do not kill people, do not murder, do not steal. These are the punishments. But if you dive deeper into law, it's not always 100% clear cut. There are some things, which I actually had come up with a patient this week, where they're extenuating circumstances, where there are things that even though you have broken that law, you can argue because of this set of things, I really shouldn't be punished, or I shouldn't be punished as harshly because these reasons kind of mitigating circumstances. Sorry, that made me do that law, that should be taken into account when deciding whether I'm guilty or innocent, or if I am guilty, how much of a punishment I get. So even in U.S. law, they have this built-in moral relativity. They have this built-in idea that even though we can be, very strict in terms of what we think is right and wrong, there are some times where we shouldn't exactly act the same exact way based on what's going on with that specific circumstance. One oldest time example is stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family. We're going to go back to Les Mis. Is that how immoral is that? A lot of people would say, yeah, it is stealing, it is wrong. But then again, it was stealing for a good reason. It wasn't stealing because you want personal gain. You're not stealing because you don't have to. You're stealing because there's going to be some other terrible consequence. Your family might starve to death, which is the reason you stole that loaf of bread. That would be a mitigating circumstance. So if you kind of went the way many religions go, with very hard codified rules like thou shalt not steal, well, in that case, should you not steal? Should you not steal if one of your family members is going to die? Should you not steal if you're going to die? That makes it a lot harder. That makes that a lot more wishy-washy back and forth. And so in the code of law of at least the U.S., I don't know if this is going to be true for every nation, there is some wiggle room. There is some times where you can say, look, this is my reason for speeding. I was speeding because my best friend in the passenger seat was bleeding to death and I wanted to get him to a hospital. They're probably not going to make you a criminal for that because you had some other reason for breaking the law. I believe morality, and I believe the church's stance of this, is morality is like that. Morality is a lot more flexible. Morality depends on specific circumstances, and things that may be immoral in some respects can be seen moral in others, really depending on what's going on. And the best way to decide that isn't by just following a bunch of rules and regulations and then just blindly following what you're told. It's to be able to ration and reason through a specific situation, look at what is good and what is bad about it, and then make the decision that is likely most moral. And a lot of times you get to this point of like, well, how do you decide what is moral? How do you decide what is good? If it's so flexible and there's so many options, is it something where you can determine what is the moral or the best decision? That's difficult. Usually I bring up the concept of the most net good done in decision making. If you were trying to decide what is moral, you should probably be trying to push for whatever decision is going to do the most net good, meaning what decision, when you take all aspects of it, makes the world the best place or adds the most good in total. And this comes a lot into play when I talk about people being selfish versus people being empathetic or giving in nature. And you'll see a spectrum of people. one far side will take from others to the point of taking a snorkel from someone drowning so they get a free snorkel, to those people who will give their last dime to someone even if they don't need it, because they'd rather not take for themselves, they'd rather give to someone else. So you have on the far side complete empathy or complete giving for others, and on the opposite side of that spectrum you have complete selfishness. At what point is that good? At what point should you take? At what point should you be selfish? And a lot of people think that you should either be one or the other. You should be either, take, or give. But in reality, there's probably a nice middle ground that you should look for, which is at what point is this appropriate amount of selfishness? What point is this an appropriate amount of giving? And a lot of people struggle with finding that point. And I usually say that point is usually the most net good. You should look at what point am I doing things that might be seen as selfish or might be self-preserving, but it's doing more good in total for the entire world. So the two examples, let's start with some extremes. Someone who's incredibly greedy, who is going to take from everybody. That person, if they're let's say we have, I'm trying to think of a really good example. I usually think of like helping someone cross the street in the most net good. You see an old lady crossing the street, and it will be a bother for you to help her because let's say you've already got other things to do. The greedy, selfish side will just say, I'm not going to help that lady. I'm just going to keep on walking because that is what's best for me. That is one end of it. Versus the other end where you go, no, you know what? That other lady does need help. I'm going to give up my time, which is a negative for me, and I'm going to go help that little old lady cross the street. Now, there's lots of gray area with that. Sometimes it may be fine to say, sorry, old lady, I'm going to keep walking and not help you cross the street. And there's going to be other times where you say, no, I'm going to take time out of my life. I'm going to go help another person. I'm going to help them cross the street. And usually the way I like to dive into this is by going, what is the most net good here? Look at all these extenuating circumstances and see what benefit is there going to be in total. What benefit is there going to be to you? What benefit is there going to be to the old lady? What benefit is there going to be to anyone else? And what is the detriment that is going to be there? If we just look at it in this simple case, the negative of helping the lady, you lose some time. You could have been doing other things. You could have been helping other people. And depending on what's going on, you could have been helping yourself. That's a certain negative for you, possibly for other people. I mean, let's say you're going to pick up your kids from school. You're going to be late. Your kids are going to be scared, worried. That's going to be a negative. That's going to be more negative if you were just going home to watch TV. Not a whole lot of negative, but still a little negative. How much help is the lady getting? Does the lady have the ability to cross the street all by herself? Not a huge amount of gain. What if it's a little old lady who can barely walk and looks like she's in physical pain just trying to get across the street, and it's going to be a struggle for her? That's a bit more gain. She's struggling. It hurts her. She could do physical harm to herself trying to cross the street. So you can get more benefit from actually helping her in that position. And what you have to do is you have to kind of weigh those two things together and say, okay, how much benefit is she getting from me doing this? How much benefit does the whole world get from this happening? How much negative is it for me to actually do this action? One example I give for empaths, because usually the people I see in office are empaths, they're usually giving so much that it's hurting them. I usually give the example of, well, what if you had to walk across broken glass in bare feet to help this lady across? Well, you're constantly cutting up your feet. You're doing a whole bunch of damage, a whole bunch of negative to yourself. And that little old lady is getting only a little bit of benefit. Yes, there is some benefit in there to that little old lady. But if you look at the net good, you're doing a lot more harm because now you're going to not be able to help other people. You're going to need a lot of time and energy just to heal yourself. And it's going to hurt you a great deal. And so in that kind of case, when you look at all the circumstances and you look for the most net good, you would say, no, it is not worth helping this little old lady, even though in many cases that would be the moral thing to do. But because there's so many clear negatives in that respect, you would say, no, I can't help that old lady. This is going to be much worse off. The world will be a worse place if I help that little old lady cross the street. Versus on the opposite side, where the little lady is really struggling. She has a broken hip and she's trying to get to an emergency room and she's trying to walk herself there, and every step is hurting that hip even more and more. That's a whole lot of good that can get done. That is a time where you should maybe even say, like, yeah, I know my kids are waiting to come home from school and I am in a hurry, but this is so much more negative to this little old lady. I know I'm going to do negatives by not getting my kids, but I'm going to do less negative or more good if I really help this lady because of how much she is suffering or how much bad is being done by not doing this thing. And that kind of idea can get applied to lots of other situations. You can look at it through abortion, murder, killing. You can try to see how much good is being done with this decision, and is there more net good being done, or is there more net harm? And that is one way to try and look at things to see, is it a moral idea, or is that decision a more moral or less moral decision? I would say morality is very relative. Another example that a lot of people have very hard stances on is abortion. Abortion is something that some people say, it should be a woman's choice. They should decide, do I want to get an abortion or not? And then other people say, no, you're killing a living being. You are doing harm. It is not. A lot of times they go, it is not God's will. It is a sin, that you should not do it. But in reality, you probably need to look at the specific situations, and there can be extenuating circumstances that change the morality of that decision. It's probably much more of a spectrum, and people probably should be best to ration it out, look at all the things that are going on, and then use that to make a decision on, is this a good or is this a bad thing given the circumstances. Let's use one example. One of the negatives is, yes, you're killing a living thing. You have something that has life and you are depriving it of life. That is, most people would agree that that is a negative. Depriving something of life is usually not a good thing without good reason to do so. But with abortion, there's degrees of that. If someone is very early on in a pregnancy, let's say immediately a day, 2 days into a pregnancy, where literally that life is only a small clump of cells that already has a high chance of being lost just to spontaneous abortions or natural abortions where someone miscarries. Sorry, I'm using medical terms. A miscarriage, which happens in about 1 in 3 regular pregnancies. Yes, that is a loss, but it's a loss that might have already happened. It's a loss of something that doesn't have consciousness, it does not have feelings, it hasn't developed it yet. That's very on, and it's yes, it's a loss, but is that the same exact loss as, let's take another extreme, a pregnancy that's already at 24, 25, 26 weeks, where that fetus is actually at a point of being viable. If that fetus was actually born with current medical technology, you could keep that fetus alive and actually survive till childhood, be a functioning adult. Are those the same amounts? Is it the same amount of harm done for the very early abortion or the very late abortion? I would argue that those two things are very different in terms of the net harm done, because if you're going to value life, I would value a life that is much more progressed, or a life that has gone through consciousness, heartbeat, feeling. That to me feels like that is doing much more harm because you had something that was much more viable, versus in the early stages. There is a chance that was not even a viable embryo, that was not even a viable fetus, that it could have spontaneously miscarried in and of itself. So I would say that is one part that can really change the situation, that can change the morality of it. Other things that can change it are the circumstances outside the pregnancy. Let's say it's a single mother in a very abusive relationship, barely able to pay for her own things, and now we're pregnant. That is a much harder situation. There's a lot more negative to carrying that child to birth and trying to raise that child. If we're going to just cut out the whole adoption versus not adoption talk, it's going to be a lot more strain, a lot more negative for that person to try and carry that baby to term and to raise that child. That child is probably going to be in a difficult situation financially. And let's say the mother really didn't want to get pregnant or have a child, that can make a very strained mother child relationship. So there's going to be a lot of harm with carrying that baby to term, to actually have that child and raise that child. That is going to be a much more difficult situation. I'm not saying that's enough to justify abortion, but you have to take that into account when you're trying to ration out the most net good, versus in a situation where it's already a loving, happy marriage. Financially, they're incredibly stable. They're not necessarily against having children. They've thought about it, and they possibly could have children. In that case, you don't have that financial negative to it. There's really not that whole negative. If anything, you've taken a lot of that relief off. You don't have as much of an argument in that case to say that this is going to be a very big harm or a very big net negative. It would be a slight inconvenience. Well, slight inconvenience. It would be a big financial inconvenience, but it's not nearly as devastating as in a small family that's already struggling. Then you can also take into other outside factors like how is the economy doing? Are we in a deep recession or depression where there's barely enough food for the parents, let alone the parents and a child? They'll have to struggle to even feed this other child if they bring it to fruition. That is a much bigger negative. You could have a child and end up saying, look, one of my other children might end up starving if I end up having this child. That really changes the morality of the abortion in that case, versus if you were taking it into a family where there is wealth in excess. If there's, you're in the land of milk and honey, you've got tons of things, you have tons of resources. Raising a child really isn't going to be that hard. Or let's even say, let's bring up adoption. Let's say there are plenty of willing parents who want to adopt a child, and that child can very easily be taken into another home and raised and have a very happy, healthy life. That makes you swing on the other side in terms of the moral spectrum, versus if you are in, let's say, a country that has almost no one willing to adopt, that you're going to be stuck with a child who is going to be a very big strain. And let's say they are not going to be able to find a happy family that's going to be able to raise them. That really changes the morality of the situation. One of the hard things with morality, and I think one of the reasons people struggle with this, is because two people can kind of come to different conclusions about morality. We all have things that bias us. We all have different opinions on how much we value each of those things. And that can cause us to come to two very different conclusions, even in the same situation. I mean, if I value life incredibly highly, like many Christian organizations do, they can value life amongst above anything else. That changes that net moral good. They would probably argue, like some people would argue, only if it's going to cause more clear death. And a lot of times that kind of line, you see this a lot in the laws, where they say, well, if the pregnancy is threatening the life of the mother, then they will allow it, or if like doctors recommend it medically to save a life. So then you can kind of take that into account. But then that's still relative. It's still relative to where the life will cause more harm to life. But those people who believe that you should weigh the value of life very highly, they're going to come to very different solutions, or rich solutions, different conclusions, than someone who is very conservative about the value of a human life. Someone who says, well, there's overpopulation. Human life really, in my opinion, is not worth that much. They're not going to have that same weight on that when they're doing their internal calculation of net good and morality. They're going to say, well, sorry, I don't really think that saving that life is worth that much. They're going to use that figure a very small amount in their percentage when they try to see how much net good is being done. They might say value it at well, I mean, you could even put it into a terms of actually having units. And this is done a lot of times in actuarial or lawmaking, where you will put a unit to good. A lot of times in health and medicine, you put number of healthy years of life gained. And then you'll use that as your kind of currency to make decisions, to say, okay, we can compare these two in an actual hard unit and see which one is better. If you were to do that in abortion, they would probably have some other currency of happiness or happy years, or whatever unit you want to try to apply to it, and then use that to determine what is the overall net best decision in that. But because people value those things differently, two people in the same situation can come up with very different solutions to that in terms of what is moral, what is ethical, and what is in all the right thing to do. But what I would say is, for people who are looking for morality, trying to determine, what should I do? What is the right thing to do? Where should I go? Or just guidance in general. I would probably say don't follow hard written rules. Don't just blindly follow what someone tells you. Learn how to ration and reason it out. Learn how to value different things, learn how to see what is good, what is bad, what net good is done, and then try to use that to guide your decisions in what is and is not moral. And I think if you do that, yes, it's a lot more complicated, but that also makes it a lot more malleable. It applies to many more situations. You know, you don't get this hard set black and white viewpoint. You can start rationally reasoning things out. And the other good thing about that is sometimes hard rules will make you do things that could be very immoral. If you believe something very strongly, but you're just blankly following, hard written rules, that can lead you to do some things that could be theoretically very immoral because you're not rationalizing things out or not reasoning things out. If you look at a lot of Old Testament stories, a lot of them, if you look at them, go like, is this really a moral thing to do? Is this a right thing? Gosh, if I want to say it's the story of Lot and his daughters, where they wanted to have children, so they got Lot drunk to get pregnant, but because he was drunk, it wasn't immoral. And you look at that now and you go, yeah, you're following a whole bunch of rules to be able to come to that conclusion, but is that still really moral, even though you follow those rules? A lot of those things can kind of fall apart, or a lot of times just following those rules without thinking about it can make you do some either very crazy or some very, very, very uh, stretched out actions that really, when you look at it, you really question of, is this moral by following this rule? And a lot of times when you're able to ration it back and forth, you can kind of come to a more logical conclusion, or a conclusion that would make more sense in the specific circumstance. um, I would say that's all for this talk. I think I've kind of gone on long enough about it. If you do have any questions about morality, or you have any situations where you're struggling of, is this the right thing, is this the wrong thing to do, post them down in the comments, post them in our Discord. We can have a discussion about them. We even will do sometimes rationalization therapy, where we'll have people, call in, and we won't necessarily give direct advice, because once again, I don't think direct advice is usually the most moral thing, but we'll help someone ration and reason out the positives and negatives of a specific situation to be able to determine, is that a moral action? Is that the moral thing to do? Because many times there is gray area. Many times it's not a simple solution. Many times it's not even a clear solution, but that's okay. I think it's more important that you make an attempt to actually see the right and wrong about a certain situation, and then try to make the most moral decision rather than just blindly following and doing. Um, that should be it for today. I hope you all have a great week, and thank you for watching till the end. Have a great day.